Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. Alright, hey guys, I'm Kate. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to another episode of Cooking with Classics. Today I'm going to be discussing a general review of The Haunting of Hill House, one of the most popular ghost stories ever told, as well as why certain works are spun off more than others in the form of movies and TV shows and radio syndicates, and also how ambiguity plays throughout the novel and maybe even potentially the gothic horror suspense genre in general, all while baking a dessert inspired by the book. Which this time will be this house right here. I mean, hopefully I will come somewhat close to making a house. First things first, as always, it's time to put some respect on Miss Shirley Jackson's name and also find a pot. Oh pot, where art thou? As a writer, the thing that actually impresses me most is the number of genres that she wrote in, but also the lengths that she wrote in. The number of short story publications she has is truly mind-boggling. Like if you check out her Wikipedia page, it just keeps going. Like there's an entire page and then you have to scroll more for more. Besides the short stories, she's also written 6 novels, including The Bird's Nest, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, and The Haunting of Hill House. Which is pretty remarkable that I'd actually heard of all of those books while not ever really having read in the genre before. And that's not even yet mentioning the sheer number of adaptations her books have spawned. Also, she has an award named after her, so you know, that's pretty cool too. Marshmallows. It sounds like a demon voice. I promise I'm not possessed by the house. But let's go ahead and put some extra respect on The Haunting of Hill House in particular, shall we? While I stir. Because Shirley's peer Stephen King called this book one of the most important horror novels of the 20th century. And in 2018, Neil Gaiman and Carmen Maria Machado told the New York frickin' Times that it was the scariest book they'd ever read. Now that's an interesting point to me in particular because I found that amongst my own personal peers, so let's say other booktubers and other authortubers, this book, The Haunting of Hill House, was kind of polarizing on if they liked it or if they even thought it was good or not. There's plenty of reasons someone might not like a particular book, but I do think the ambiguity that this novel really plays around with is definitely part of the reason that it gets some criticism. But that ambiguity is very purposeful. Like the screenwriter who wrote the first film's adaptation, 1963's The Haunting, the one that my dad was scared of if y'all watch my Spookathon vlog. He actually thought it had more to do with mental breakdown than anything supernatural. Now this ambiguity and spookiness is actually set up from the beginning. Even just going off the back of the book, Dr. Montague is an occult scholar looking for solid evidence of psychic phenomena. And basically he sends out these letters to other people who have had sort of creepy things associated with them. Alrighty, I think we've done it. And speaking of something set up early, let's talk about that opening line because it's freaking iconic. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. What a freaking first paragraph, oh my god. Okay, so basically we have this house that's creepy, right? And we have the occupants that are gonna be inside, also potentially creepy, and also they're looking for more creepy things. It's all creepy. But then on top of that, we basically have the characters and thus the reader sort of acknowledging the creep at every turn. And actually, the interaction of the characters was one of my favorite parts. And during my Spookathon vlog, where's my wax paper? I talked about how similar parts of the book were to Clue, the movie. Just the like snarky back and forth one-off lines that the characters had. This back and forth made the book so much more entertaining to me, the kind of richness of the dialogue. But let's go back to the creep and the ambiguity, which does turn up in both the dialogue and our main character's thoughts. All of this intertwines more and more as the novel progresses, but we get a sense of it from the very beginning. Like on page 13, our main character, Eleanor, is saying, now what was here, she wondered. What was here and is gone, or what was going to be here and never came? Was it going to be a house or garden or an orchard? Were they driven away forever, or are they coming back? Oleanders are poisonous, she remembered. Could they be here guarding something? Will I, she thought, will I get out of my car and go between the ruined gates, and then, once I am in the magic Oleander Square, find that I have wandered into a fairyland, protected poisonously from the eyes of people passing? And on it goes, right? So early on, we get this sort of sense of imagining, of what ifs, and this is all set up to sort of make sense, right? Like our main character, Eleanor, is kind of, she's running away from home for the first time from a bad situation, and she's doing something crazy for once in her life after caring for her ailing mother and having to deal with her sister and her brother-in-law and all this stuff. So for once, she's doing something a little bit selfish, so you think the imagining all of these what ifs are a reasonable thing for her to do, right? But then at some point you realize that maybe it's just a little bit much. And the point that I realized this was actually involving stars. Cleared it out. I suppose I should be more specific and say the cup of stars. So on page 14, not much later, as Eleanor is still imagining all the what ifs and running away, she actually comes across a small family. Eleanor looked up surprised. The little girl was sliding back in her chair sullenly, refusing her milk, while her father frowned and her brother giggled, and her mother said calmly she wants her cup of stars. Indeed, yes, Eleanor thought. Indeed, so do I. A cup of stars, of course. Now, as we go on a little bit, just to page 15, we're still on this cup of stars, right? Don't do it, Eleanor told the little girl. Insist on your cup of stars. Once they have trapped you into being like everyone else, you will never see your cup of stars again. Don't do it. And the little girl glanced at her and smiled, a little subtle dimpling, fully comprehending smile, and shook her head stubbornly at the glass. Brave girl, Eleanor thought. Wise, brave girl. And now this bravery is something that Eleanor in particular kind of struggles with throughout the novel, honestly, among other things. But let me take you to page 64, when I was starting to realize, oh shit. Eleanor thought, looking down at her hands, which were badly shaped. We could have afforded a laundress, she thought. It wasn't fair. My hands are awful. I have a little place of my own, she said slowly. And now, of course, we realize that she's like kind of lying here, but we don't totally get it. I have a little place of my own, she said slowly. An apartment like yours, only I live alone. Smaller than yours, I'm sure. I'm still furnishing it, buying one thing at a time. You know, to make sure I get everything absolutely right. White curtains. I had to look for weeks before I found my little stone lions on each corner of the mantle. Another thing that she'd referenced before from something that she had seen as she was passing by. And I have a white cat and my books and records and pictures. Everything has to be exactly the way I want it because there's only me to use it. Once I had a blue cup with stars painted on the inside. When you looked down into a cup of tea, it was full of stars. I want a cup like that. So we're getting into these weird what ifs, and that's what all of them do throughout the book. They are doing a whole lot of imagining. And then we're starting to see maybe something more sinister. Alrighty, I'm thinking I'm gonna use half. That way, in case I totally mess it up, at least half are still edible. Now, from a technical writing perspective, Shirley Jackson really loves her some long-ass sentences. For example, on page 36, this is a whole sentence. It led them tantalizingly closer to the sound of the water, doubling back and forth through the trees, giving them occasional glimpses down the hill to the driveway, leading them around out of sight of the house, across a rocky meadow, and always downhill. Okay. So where this is kind of like the tempo that we're moving at for a lot of this, and this weird kind of lackadaisical nature with which the story is told, I actually found it a good juxtaposition for the creepiness. Like, it almost added into the creepiness. Furthermore, she also starts a lot of chapters the same way. Like, we have that iconic opening line from the first chapter, right? Okay, so let's go find the second chapter. There we go. No human eye can isolate the unhappy coincidence of line and place which suggests evil in the face of a house, and yet somehow a maniac juxtaposition, a badly turned angle, some chance meeting of roof and sky, turn Hill House into a place of despair, more frightening because the face of Hill House seemed awake, with a watchfulness from the blank windows and a touch of glee in the eyebrow of a cornice. By the way, that was also one whole sentence. And this is interesting to me because not all of the chapters necessarily started that way, but a lot of them started that way, talking about the creepiness in the house, and then it's just kind of almost like, are we doing it on purpose to like make the rest of the chapter within it seem different, but it wasn't every time. I don't know, it was fascinating, it was interesting. The house on the cover has a bit of like an A-frame going on and then a chimney, so we're gonna see if we can recreate any of that. Something else Shirley utilizes is dialogue in a way to tell you of the terror and of the creepiness. The characters are often wondering aloud about how creepy the house is, saying that it even looks evil, and that we see its wrongness at parts and even get an explanation from Dr. Montague early on in the book about how everything is purposefully built just to be a little bit off. The terror is mostly shown in discussions between the characters as they're experiencing things. I don't know if this is gonna look anything like that. And then, okay. This is totally a house, right? It's not a house. Little chimney in the back, yeah. Yeah. And I did buy some chocolate. It's gonna be a brown house instead of an orange house or a red house. Anyways, so we're gonna see. This is baking chocolate. It should melt pretty easily, I hope, and we'll just pour it over the house and see if it looks more like a house. Double boiler, I'm not gonna do that. Microwave method. I got the lovely bar of chocolate. Now, one of my main interests about reading these older classics is to see how much writing has changed over time. This book was written in 1959, with the exception of within the chapter. It's like each new scene has to have its own numbering system again, and then There Were None had the same thing. But that's kind of the only difference. It's not like, say, Pride and Prejudice, where there was just endless description telling what had happened. This one felt very similar to a novel written now. But the main difference, I think, is kind of in the same vein of a chronicling of history. Like, despite all of these characters basically being on their own in the house, there is a lot of gender norms and stereotypes for the given time period, and that is reflected in the book. But I do think they have a lot more agency potentially than what other characters might have at that time. Like within a gothic horror suspense novel, if you don't have your own agency, you might just kind of die. So I'm curious if this is something that's more normal for the genre even. Like, is it usually this progressive, if only because if it's not, I don't know, I don't know. Now the question remains, why this story, why this gothic horror suspense novel is any more popular than any others? And I think the answer is pretty simply, can you think of anything more classically scary than a haunted house? Vampires and werewolves and all that sort of stuff we kind of ignore, but haunted houses are classic. They're timeless. All right. I think I'm not gonna have enough chocolate, but all right. So, I've seen some quotes suggesting that The Haunting of Hill House is like the original haunted house story, and you can check Wikipedia and that's not necessarily true. There have been other haunted house stories or premises like this, but I do think it repopularized this notion of a haunted house. Like, there was kind of nothing for a while, and then all of a sudden Haunting of Hill House, and then boom. And while several of the adaptations have stayed truer to the novel, you know, the Netflix adaptation basically just took this premise of a haunted house and gathering people there. I think it's more of like a family drama. I don't know, because I gotta continue with the show. But even the other adaptations have changed the why it's haunted, even if they're staying truer potentially to some of the character traits, but even then they play around with them. And why not? Why not? What are you asking for when you're thinking The Haunting of Hill House? Which again, I think is precisely why like Clue is inspired by it. Another gathering of people to all one location, and then the rest of the story just kind of goes from there. I would classify what I made right now as kind of terrifying. My house is kind of a mullet because the bag is not. It's fine, it's fine. Let's see, I might have enough chocolate left over that I can fix this. I can do it. Would you stay here? Now, I think I should say finally that one of my absolute favorite things about this novel is actually the circular nature of it, the way it starts and then the way it ends. Not only with Eleanor crashing in the same place that one of the original people crashed in, but within the ending paragraph, In fact, the ending scene. Hill House itself, not sane, stood against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, its walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. Damn. I thought it was so good. I thought it was so good, and I love the circular nature of anything, but when books can pull it off, and so much so that you can start with something and end with something so perfectly, oh, it was amazing. Hopefully, like my house will be. I think it was prettier before I put the chocolate on it, but it's fine. It's fine. Anyways, gonna move that out of sight. That is gonna be it for me. Please do comment down below. Let me know if you've read The Haunting of Hill House before. Let me know if you've watched any of its or listened to any of its various adaptations. And if so, what was your favorite? And do you have any favorite kind of gothic horror suspense novels? I would love to check more out in the future. And if you have any suggestions for my next Cooking with Classics, I would love to hear about them. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all very soon with another video. Okay, bye. Think it looks like Dad?
One of those claymation houses that's kind of melting in the...
Melting! No! And you thought it was a... What do you think it was?
Since headgears.
Wow, so rude to my little house.